Hi everyone, my name's Declan McGlynn. Welcome to Friday Forum Live, Point Blank's weekly broadcast, bringing you exclusive tutorials, artist interviews and industry insight every Friday, live from East London. Today we're taking a look at mono, stereo and understanding width in your mixes. So today I'm joined by Point Blank Head of School, JC Concato, and we're going to take a look at understanding mono and stereo and how to make the most of both to give your tracks width and focus. And if you want to learn more about audio fundamentals and how to mix your own music, you can take one of our online diplomas from anywhere in the world, or you can take one of our diploma courses right here in London. Visit pointblanklondon.com for more info on that. So JC.
Hello.
Another Friday.
Another Friday
forum.
again. Another
How are you
forum.
doing?
I'm very good, and you day?
Excellent.
Excellent.
Looking forward to this. So let's just get straight into it. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mono, stereo, what is it? What's the difference?
What is the difference? So, I mean, first thing, maybe the easiest way would be just to define what is mono. So, mono typically is one channel of audio signal, one source, one microphone, or if it was a synth, it's a one output. It's one mono signal. A stereo is two channels of audio signal, but where the signal on each channel is different. And I think that is already straight away, that's an important definition of the differences.
So we'll go stereo isn't just two channels?
It's just not two channels of identically
They have to be
That's
different.
not a stereo, right. Exactly. It has to be different channel, different elements, information in it. And we can talk a little bit about binaural, which effectively is stereo, but the concept of binaural is when you record something using microphone, whether in the ears or very close to the ears, to reproducing the way we hear things. That's called a binaural technique. Effectively, it can give you a very accurate stereo picture, representation of what you want to. Typically, the Neumann head is a great microphone, looks like a head, artificial head with microphones in each ear. And that simulates the whole way we hear things. So that's, I think now we can move on once we've defined that. So when should a sound be stereo, when should it be mono, and why is the first question. You know, we've discussed a few questions together and we thought, okay, those could be quite interesting. And I think for me, the first thing to consider, and which is very important, is that in the real world, most instruments are mono. If I play a flute, if I play a guitar, if I play a kick drum, a snare, all those elements are mono, effectively. And the only reason you want to capture them stereo would be to start placing them into a context to create a stereo field. So that really is very, very important to consider that.
Right.
You know, when you start recording and if you start producing, it's the same. I'm going to keep on going with real examples with electronics. The reason is that we tend to apply the same rules ultimately when you mix. Although with electronic music we don't try to recreate something visually real, so you could say we break all the rules, but somehow we tend to apply the same.
Okay, so it's good to keep in mind that in the real world, anything you're hearing, more or less, is mono.
Well, it's not that simple, because actually, well, it isn't, because in the real world, if I speak to you now, I hear you're mono, but the space around you which comes into the picture of what I hear, reflections, effectively I'm hearing it from left and right. But I can't define, if I'm like that, I can hear you coming that, but I'm going to hear reflection coming here. So there's all those things about how do we hear sound? You know, the whole masking effect and, you know, the whole... and humans are very good at locating sounds when they're left and right. And when you mix, that's kind of like what you're playing with. But you've got to be aware that when you listen to a sound, for example, coming out on the left, it comes still on the right, it's going to be quieter. The reflections coming here are going to be duller because of the masking effect as well. So I'm hearing you here, but there's a masking effect going on. So all that kind of stuff. And that's why binaural kind of recreate quite well that kind of phenomenon. Keeping in, you know, the whole masking and the whole, etc. So when should you use, there's something that is really important to consider whether you're going to use mono or stereo sounds, is that when you have a stereo sound, we record each other speaking with a stereo mic here, it's not going to be that obvious where we are. If I put a stereo microphone in front of us, we may hear you slightly on one side, me on the other side, but it's not going to be that obvious. Think if you're going to a gig, the kind of reverb of the room kind of mask almost their ability to locate, because only the reverb and reflection are going all around, and it's becoming more difficult to pinpoint what's on the right, what's on the left. Whereas if I put two mono mics for each of us, like we have those here, and I pan them, then it's going to be very clear somebody's on the left, somebody's on the right. So that's, bear in mind that when you start, should I be mixing mono or stereo?
So in a way, mono is more effective
Exactly.
at creating a stereo image than stereo.
Exactly, because of those reasons.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you get to a stereo recording and you're not locating so well where things are going on. So things to really bear in mind. Also, something to bear in mind is CPU, simple stuff like CPU. The more stereo channels take more CPU, hard drive. Stereo file uses more of your hard drive. Therefore, you're going to be able to play less stereo file than mono files. Stereo effects take more CPU on your computer. So when you don't need stereo signal, think about going mono. It makes sense.
So would you recommend, if you're loading a soft synth and you get the mono stereo option, would you, unless you have a reason to go stereo, go mono?
Yeah.
Okay.
But unless there's a reason, and there are plenty of reasons, I'm not saying suddenly we should be back to mono and mixing in mono. There are plenty of reasons why you would want to be stereo. Modern music is based on massive width, a big picture. And I've got an example here of a kind of a electro track from our courses online. And I've kind of made it a bit wider than it should, just to illustrate. But it works, because for electronic music, I think there's scope for that. So if I quickly play you a little bit of that, there's a big effect coming in. So you can hear on that, the bass is, I've made it kind of super wide, slightly unnaturally because I want to discuss some of the stuff. I've even made a kick stereo. I've even made other elements stereo where maybe they shouldn't need to be. That way we could start to illustrate. So for example, what should be mono in there? Quickly, listen to the kick, for example. In real life, again, a kick drum, we tend to have it in the middle. The bass, we tend to have it in the middle. You know, if we start going into where you play sound in the stereo field, this is where normally they should go, you know. Something to bear in mind is low frequencies are more difficult to locate in the stereo field. With the low frequency, it's not that easy to, if you put it, let's say 10 o'clock, it's not that easy to locate where it's going. That's why you tend to pan the stuff higher, because that you can tell more effectively. Also because you want your energy and your power, you want it to be equal on two speakers. That's where, again, mono, kick, bass would be usually in the middle. And normally what would be stereo is if you want to start spreading, have a sense of stereo, and it depends on the style of music. For example, if a track is quite bare, you need to occupy the space because there's not much going on. You need to fill in that stereo field. So you may start putting reverb, create artificial stereo field, or record stuff in stereo clearly to hear that kind. Let's say if there was an acoustic track with just an acoustic guitar and a kick drum, you probably would want as much stereos to occupy the space a little bit to get something happening rather than two little things here and feeling really isolated. But the busier the track becomes, you probably need more and more mono sounds to be able to isolate them instead of all mushing and becoming a bit incoherent in your stereo picture.
Yeah, and those mono sounds are still given a stereo representation by the reverb sends.
Absolutely.
They're not
and you could
mono.
argue, even if they're dry, they give you a stereo representation because you listen to your mix, and if you have a hi-hat pan on the left-hand side, you've got another tambourine on the right, then it's clear what the stereo picture here. You've got two elements playing against each other. So it's really defined, really. Whereas if you had a stereo hat, and maybe louder on the left side and quieter, it wouldn't be that distinct. It maybe become difficult. So that's where I think, you know, mono has still a big part. Big part
sure.
in
So maybe we could hear the track and like turn off the widening and just hear the difference.
Yeah, let's start. So, for example, on the kick drums at the moment it's mono, so it's stereo. So one way to cut it to what I use a lot is this gain plugin in Logic, for example. Mono button straight away. So I'm gonna put that in mono. The kick. Now, the sub here, if you listen here, you can see it's a stereo channel, but they're both pretty similar left-hand side by the look of it. But still, I'm going to put it in mono as well here. And then we've got this fat bass, where is it? let's play around that circle. Yeah, it's quite stereo that, a little bit, and let's try mono as well. Let's try mono. Yeah, because it's the effect. You see, it's the reverb. The reverb gives you the stereo, but the sound is mono. I think it gives you just a little bit more clarity. See straight away.
Yeah, you can definitely hear the.
You know what I mean? And then have a look here. It's an interesting one. This one. It's a stereo hi-hat. So, like I was saying, if we were to make it mono, gonna go into the gain here, and if we were to get it mono, now it's in the middle, but now I'm gonna pan it. Straight away, it's a bit clearer as well. It's clearly there, defined here, so that works better. Now the clap is massively stereo, but I think that works. That's what you want. It's a big. If you're happy with that, it's not. You know, there's no reason why it's not working. So totally works really well. And straight away, you see it's working a lot better. A bit more focus.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah.
So talking about panning then, I mean, can maybe talk us through how panning works in Logic? Because
can we keep that? Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do that now, actually, to cover that now, if you want, no problem. There's one thing about Logic which is, I've got to say, is a bit of a pain for me, and I've asked for that feature for many, many years now.
Come on, Apple.
And it's basically the pan on a stereo fader is not really a pan. It's a balance level between left and right. So if I pan on one, let's take a sound which is really, really stereo. Just gonna listen to. Yeah, that's quite stereo there. Okay? So if you pan on one side, what happens is you're making the left-hand side louder and the right-hand side quieter.
Yeah.
So it's not a real pan in that sense. So you're suddenly losing one of the sides, and it's a big problem for me in Logic. What I love about Pro Tools, for example, is that you've got the possibility to have two mono pan pots, and that makes a big difference. Because you may have time where all you have to do is you've got a stereo and all you want to do is narrow it or keep the relationship between left and right, but just tilt it one way or another. Mm-hmm. But keeping that relationship, that ratio between the left and right hand side, the left and right hand side. If you do that with that, what you're doing is effectively only getting one side and starting disappearing the other side. The workaround in Logic is, let me reset that, is to use the utility mixer, which is on the, I've got to remember where it is, it's imaging, direction mixer. Okay. Now, with that, if you change the direction here, what you're ending up doing is actually doing exactly that. Keeping your ratio left and right, but moving it where you are. So if you want to pan a stereo without losing that relationship, you need to use the direction mixer.
Right.
Also, you've got the spread. The spread is the equivalent to old school desk used, the way we used to work is old school desk didn't have that many stereo faders, channels. They would often have mono channels, and you would use two channels to create one hard pan left, one right, and you push them up, same levels, that's your stereo channel, made of two. What it allowed you is have an independent control for each pan. Maybe, typically we would say, oh, put that at 9:15 instead of hard pan, things like that. So that would be your spread. That would be the equivalent of reducing the two pan pot. I still feel it's a convoluted way to do it. I'd rather them to have
two mono pans.
Two mono pans. Yeah. In order to do that, there's something which is great for that, and it's a plugin by Flux, which is the stereo tool.
And it's free plugin, isn't it?
And it's a free plugin as well, and it's really, really, really useful. They've got a new version 3, which is 64-bit compatible, so it's great. And you see, they still have the pan, the center, the width. That would be the equivalent of your direction mixer. But also, you've got 2 pan pot here. And that, for me, is the key. So if we were to put them in the middle, both of them, then now you're in mono. You see? On top of it, it's got a nice metering, so you're seeing what's happening here, and it shows you what's going on. You see the difference? That's in stereo, and that was in mono. It's a great little tool to have. It has phase, it has everything.
Yeah.
That is really, really useful.
Cool.
And then on the subject of phase, I think it would be a good idea to move on to mono compatibility.
We hear that phrase a lot, but what does it actually mean?
What it means is that to make sure that your mix is compatible in mono.
Okay.
Why in mono? Many club systems are still mono. Again, we've discussed it many times on FFL. I keep on saying the same thing, but it's about getting the same power, the same level wherever you are in a club, whether you're at the bar or on the
so it's not
dance
that
floor.
you only get the hi-hat on this side of the dance floor.
Exactly, you're getting the same. So that's one of the reasons why you have that in club. But also, a lot of the new kind of digital radio, those little cute things, often have a mono speakers. They're mono. Also, radio broadcast tends to work better in mono. So radio broadcast is stereo. As soon as you hit bad reception, the signal moves into mono because it handles noise better. So there's a lot of reasons why your mix should be compatible in mono.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is what is phase? Because that's the problem. What do we mean by mono compatibility is something to do with phase.
Okay.
So quickly, what is phase? Phase is related to both timing and frequency of a sound wave. The time difference between the 2 identical sound waves can cause.
Yeah.
So that's the concept of phase. Remember we've said a stereo signal is something that has different information on each side. However, every sound has a cycle. If you look at an oscillator, the idea, everything has a cycle, a sound wave, that goes from plus, minus, going back to the 0 point, plus, minus. You've got a polarity, plus and minus. When you've got 2 sound waves playing in stereo, or not necessarily in stereo, but together at the same time, within the same frequencies, things happen. They sum up. But sometimes they can cancel. When they sum up, they become louder. When they cancel each other, they become quieter. Let's have a listen. I've created a little bit of artificial phase cancellation for that purpose. But first, the best way to illustrate is here. I've got this kick drum. Okay? I've put it back to mono. But now what I'm going to do is, it's a stereo signal, but I'm going to invert the phase. So making it, so you see here straight away it gives a weird picture.
Yeah.
Okay, really, really weird. Kind of. But if I put it in mono, it's gone.
So what we're hearing now is the stereo information that remained.
No, what we hear now is actually, what I've done is checking for mono compatibility.
Right.
What I've done is inverted the phase on one side. So you're getting the plus, the other one goes the opposite, therefore totally cancelling each other. What happened, the reason why checking mono compatibility is important, is that when taken to that extreme, a sound in mono would disappear. So imagine if you do that in a club and one of your bass sound is disappearing. That's why we keep on saying mono bass and all that kind of stuff, to try to make sure that you're getting all the important element not going berserk. Now, if we listen to that bass, let me show you. I've got this, which one is it? Yeah. This one, it's very, very stereo. And let's look at the flux tool on that one. Look at the information here, yeah? It's going crazy. And the phase relationship you see here, you've got the plus and the minus. It's out of phase, okay? It's very heavily out of phase. Now, if I add to it now, make it mono, we're okay, it's still there. But you hear it's phasey, but it works.
It's much more powerful.
It's much more power, but we've lost the massive width of it.
Right.
But here's an example that it's really weird, it's phase negative, but it still works in mono. But there would be time where this sound and the way we've created that width, I think, is with the sample delay. Let's put it back in mono. It's a So you see how it changes the phase? Because as we are moving one of the sides, we are moving the correlation between the two sound waves. The phase is changing, so the sound is changing.
So the sample delay essentially allows you to delay one channel
Yes.
individually
Yeah,
from the
absolutely,
other.
absolutely. But what was good, so mono compatibility is important because of that. You want to make sure that you listen, the good practice is listen to your whole mix and go there. And mono compatibility, correlation is going to give you a good idea. See, there's a lot of information there. But if it was out of phase, we would probably get some sort of a hole in the middle. And overall, the correlation is good here. If you look here, we're in the plus. That means we're fine. And that bass, you know, the bass we played is the most guilty party. But it works as a mono mix. It works, so we're okay. Let's listen to it in mono.
The clap is
totally gone.
some issues.
Yeah, massive issue on the clap. Have you noticed? Clap is nearly gone. My take is, we've got a problem with the clap. We need to fix. We've gone crazy on the stereo. It sounded great stereo-wise, but in mono, we've got a big issue here. Have you noticed? I mean, you're going to expect a massive reduction and a bit of a change, but not that much of a jump. Because that's what you would listen in a club, and the track doesn't work so well anymore. Therefore, mono compatibility is a massive, massive, important issue, I think.
Cool. So before we move on to making things super wide, how would you go about placing something in the stereo field?
Yeah, well, like I said...
if you wanted to think, okay, I want this.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would go with, there are certain rules. Kick seems to be in the middle, snares in the middle, lead vocal in the middle, all those things that are kind of important. And then you create the stereo appearance of it by effects, reverb, delays, choruses, whatever. And so they become a bit wider. But they are, the main focus is in the middle. And then, after that, in terms of synth, guitars, percussion, element of the drums, hi-hat, toms, cymbal, those ones you tend to start spreading them. They're the basic that I think everybody knows about. What I want to talk about is another issue, is the fact that now everything is stereo.
Right.
And back in the days of working on desk, and again, it's this idea of like, if you have too many stereo signals, it's about getting a very distinct stereo picture. If you have too many stereo things going on, it's becoming quite difficult to locate where things are, and it can become a bit too much, a bit too wide. And when that happens, suddenly you're struggling to find where things are. It's losing a bit of punch. And one of the issues is that every synth now comes stereo. And with DAW like those, you basically tend to keep it as they are. That means everything is super wide, which means nothing is because there's no reference. I think you really need to have some stuff in the middle to make things wide, efficient. And then suddenly you can have like, yeah, wow. When that comes in, you're really noticing it. There's a reason for it. Yeah. It really works, whether it's a pad, whether it's an FX that's moving left and right, whether you're panning things, or, you know, all those kind of things. And the problem, what we used to do on mixing, on Mixer Desk, would be to often, if you have BVs, you tend to move them, you know, some left, some right. It's totally cool. But hard pan them, and then have another synth hard pan, then another thing hard pan, another piano hard pan with the low notes here, the high notes there. Suddenly it's becoming hard to tell where are things, where is the piano, where are the BVs. So one thing we used to do would be to narrow the width with the pan, with the two pan. That's why we talk often about 10 to 10, 9:15. Those are the kind of refer to, like a clock, to the pan positioning of where you put things. And the only thing we would have really hard pan constantly would be FX. That would be your kind of world of your hemisphere, if you like, you know. And nowadays we don't tend to do that, and that's something I would strongly recommend to do. The primary logic, you need to do that with the direction mixer or the flux. Or another solution could be to send a track to two buses, to two mono buses, and do the same trick. But to illustrate what I'm talking about here, I just need to find. Need to find something that's going to be effective. So like we said, those basses are a bit too wide, so we could, for example, put our flux here, and I would narrow it a little bit. Let's say if we take that, you notice the difference? That's super wide. It's a little bit more narrow, but I think it helps. It's a bit more realistic. You're leaving space for things super wide. So that's really an advice that I want to give to everyone.
Yeah, and
don't go super wide on everything, otherwise nothing is effectively.
Yeah, and by default, a lot of new plugins will load a sound super stereo just to impress you, to go like, hey, that sounds good.
Absolutely.
But actually it can be detrimental.
And the same way with a lot of sound library, you know, sample library now, kicks are becoming, everything is stereo and super wide. It's kind of like, well, after that it's really hard to tell where things are, like I said, you know, where things located. So that would be the main thing I would talk about.
So yeah, we got plenty of questions. So let's just dive straight in. Jasper Zapfi is asking, is there any way to give a bass line more bass in the higher notes without giving the low notes too much? I don't know if he means bass or width.
Yeah, I would imagine. I would imagine.
As it moves up.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way to do it normally. You know, you would tend to do, like I've said, the separation, the width. You would give it on the higher frequency because you notice them, and because on the low you don't anyway. So you tend to mono the bottom, like we've discussed many times, and there are many tools to do that.
Yeah, or you could create an auxiliary channel, roll off the auxiliary channel, put a chorus on it after the EQ, and then send it. So you're always widening the frequencies after a certain point.
Yeah. Parallel effects and EQ.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see what else we've got here. There's plenty.
There's something I wanted to add as well on the kind of mono, the mono things. Is that sometimes you've got a couple of sounds which share the same frequencies. You should always listen to your mix in mono, but by starting separating them, you may be it may suddenly not be necessary to EQ them anymore because they don't clash anymore. They're separated. It's when they're together that kind of indistinction becomes.
So would you say reach for pan before EQ in some cases?
Yeah, I would.
Keeps it natural sound instead of rolling everything off all the time.
Yeah,
it's good advice. We got I can't even pronounce this. I'm really sorry. Dimitri's asking. That's not actually what it said. What is the ideal ethos when adding reverb to a synthetic drum kit? So if a synth sound that doesn't obviously never existed in the real world, what's the ethos for giving it some space?
It's totally cool. Yeah, go for it.
Would you say, is there any advice for like creating a room? Would you just make it the same as the rest of the sounds in the track? Or?
Yeah, I don't know. I would use a send. Again, I would probably use a send just because it gives me that control. So I would tend to, I'm not saying I never use stereo snare samples. I do occasionally when I want that kind of, but otherwise often we end up, I think we've gone the other way now. We used to have mono sounds all the time just because they had less memory and things like that. So everything would be mono and we were working on getting width. Now it's the opposite. We almost have to kind of reducing width rather than this. I'm seeing that kind of pattern a little bit nowadays. But I would, in terms of adding width to synthesizing drums, I would create the same, use reverb, mostly reverb really, to be honest. But it can be also, short delays to create some kind of room simulation if you wanted to have that kind of thing. Some plugins like the UAD Ocean Wave, for example, recreates a real room. After that, anything is possible. There's no, the ethos is to make sure that it just works and the direct sound keep the punch if it needs to be punchy. So that's why for me a mono signal to start with, you get the punch, you've got the directness to it, you know.
Someone's Melodic Meerkat, that's a good name, is asking, what is the free plugin called? So just to make sure it's called Flux.
Yes, it's by Flux and it's called Stereo Tool. And you can download it for free on their website. We just did literally 5 minutes before.
Yeah. So Marvel Music is asking mono verb or classic reverbs, and I think it's probably a good time to talk about mono reverb. Why would you ever want to use mono reverb?
Again, it helps. It's more a combination of stereo sounds together don't help identifying, locating if it's coming from left and right. So often I would use a mono reverb, especially when a mix is really busy. There's a lot of things going on. It's a full multi-track, lots of guitar layering, playing against each other, left and right, and things like that. The more, if you put all that in the stereo on top of it, you're losing your definition, effectively. The more stereo reverb you use on a sound, even if it's mono in the first place, the more you put, the less distinct it becomes to tell it coming, it's there, it's placed there, effectively, you know, very precisely there. So I would put a mono reverb and usually put it together, like mix the reverb with the signal.
Pan the reverb.
In exactly the same place, and that way the sound is there. It has the depth, it does what you want to do, but you're keeping the look, it doesn't affect the rest of it. Works great on guitars and synth, I think, when you really want that kind of like long tail and depth back in the mix, but at the same time still being there and not having a continuity of washy affecting the rest of your mix.
Yeah, totally. People like that question. CCR2971, it's catchy. Would you widen everything via the master channel above 7K?
No.
He says Skrillex says he uses this technique in Ozone, isotope Ozone. So that's essentially more of a mastering thing.
I would leave that to the mastering. The way I mix, I aim to get the mix as close as I can to something that I'm happy with.
So you wouldn't put any widening tools on the master channel?
Not on the master channel. I'll do it on the part that I want. A widening tool. Typically here, what I've done was on this bass here. On this one, so I've used the sample delay to create that. That's my widening tool. You know, I mean, if you listen to that bass without, check it out. Yeah, that's without the widening tool. That's with the widening tool. And that's what I would use the widening tool on the part I want.
Okay.
And I may do it as an insert, like I've done here. I wanted something quite radical, and I didn't need to share it with anything, so I was like, yeah, I'm doing it on the channel. If I want a bit of widening tool elsewhere, I would maybe share it on the bus, across the bus.
Right. Cool. Theo Costas is asking, I've known not to have anything on the sides under 300 hertz. Maybe 300 is a bit high, but definitely not anything less than 150. But when I pan guitars and I high pass them, they're too weak. Do you pan things on the sides with things on the lower mid-range? I think what he's saying is that he's trying to keep things in mono, so he's rolling his guitars off, but rolling off probably isn't the solution.
I know we need to think low frequency in the middle and stuff like that, but on guitar, I'm talking very low frequency, 60
right.
and stuff.
So not up to 300.
On mono. But I'm totally happy to have even 100, a guitar that has 100 hertz content on one side and another one is totally fine. It's part of the sound. Otherwise, you're going to start. I mean, basically, think of it that way. If you start EQing and keeping stuff in the middle and putting crossovers, you're getting a lot of crossovers. You're going to get more phase problem, and it's becoming less and less natural, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. NXCVX, when should someone make a kick wide?
Whenever it works in the track.
And don't want to hear that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know.
Well, I mean, just check the mono compatibility.
Check the mono compatibility. If it works in the track, it doesn't. If you still can locate it, if it gives you what it needs, you know. I mean, in hip hop, in rock, it's quite common to have extremely wide kick, especially in more modern production, like really stereo or, you know. In dance music, I think it's less common, I mean, we're still getting a bit of you can have reverb and stuff and getting a bit of space, but think of it that way. I wouldn't go on the kick, in my opinion, wouldn't be the widest element in my mix. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, we in the courses, on the mixing course we do here, you know, as part of the diploma, downstairs in the college, for example, we've got a whole day on imaging phase and trying different things, you know, because that's how important it is.
Yeah, and touching on that, I mean, we are running out of time. So, but if you do want to learn all of this and a lot more, make sure you check out our courses.
Yeah, I mean,
so we've got time for
both online and in the college. We've
Yeah.
got literally the whole lesson dedicated to that because it's so important. And starting to make you aware of the sound of phase, because phase is not only mono stereo, it's also as soon as you've got two microphones over a signal, you're getting a relationship. As soon as there's a relationship of two signals for the same sound,
Yeah,
things
to
to
take
be
it
aware
into
of.
account.
Yeah.
So quickly, one more question. Ruben is asking, a couple of people have asked this already, how can you check for mono compatibility? Well, in Logic, the utility plugin
Utility gain plugin.
is mono.
As a mono button.
I think in Ableton, I'm not sure, but
I
I
don't
think
see-
there's
I
a
don't- I
gain
don't-
plugin.
but
you
I'm
can
sure
use.
there must be.
But yeah,
I'm sure
someone in
there-
the comments, I'm
there's
sure
bound
uses
to be. I'm
Ableton
sure
will
somebody in the
reply.
yeah. And put it on your master fader, obviously, so you hear the whole thing. I mean, you've seen this track with the clap section, how radically changed. It completely changed really radically.
Yeah.
So really listen to the whole track, not only a sound in mono. You may need to check a sound in mono, but check the whole mix in mono.
Okay, cool. And one more comment is that Donald says that Calvin Harris says he puts all frequencies under 300 hertz in mono. So there you go.
It must be the way to do it. No?
That must be the way. Well, it's the way he does it. So.
That's the way he
Yeah.
does it, yeah.
But you know, it's not.
Yeah, I
Use
mean,
your ears. Decide if it's right.
yeah, absolutely. You know, if it works, if it works. I mean, I like to keep personally things. You know, sometimes the idea is to get not only a stereo picture that works well, that is balanced and appealing and does sound full, etc. But also break the rules. You know. Surprise people. Sometimes it's interesting to have something like, wow, jumps out on one side and then moves around, or suddenly the voice becomes here because there's something else happening. And, you know, you should experiment a little bit with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if it's, you know, think of it that way. If you have a mono sound that you pan, it is mono compatible because it's a mono sound. It's when you start putting effects on it and stuff that is becoming less and less mono compatible.
Right. Cool. Nice one. There's one more comment from
Yeah.
Sebs Demani. Says, "I love you."
Oh,
we love you too, Sebs.
I love you too.
You're the man, Sebs.
We love you.
So yeah, we are out of time, but hopefully you got plenty of mixing inspiration for the weekend. And if you're thirsty for more, you can always take one of our diploma courses, which includes mixing, sound design, composition, and much more, either online or here in London. And you can visit pointblanklondon.com for more info on those courses. And we'll be back next Friday for another FFL. See you then.